welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed, and we are trying to understand what philosophy is. But not only that, in understanding what philosophy is, Socrates is helping us understand what is the nature of the soul and where do we go when we die. So to recap where we are in the text, and of course we are learning about this from Socrates through the text, the Phaedo. And we are reading a Balboa translation, which has the actual Greek, as well as a far more accurate English translation above the Greek. So we can read it without interpretation, something that hasn't been possible until recent times. Until the last 10 or 20 years, literally. So we have what we need to awaken the quest of philosophy in our lives, for our souls, and for humanity. And we are taking that challenge, accepting that quest to reach the excellence of the soul, of being human, and of course, doing our intended purpose. Socrates is helping us to see that philosophy is our purpose here. And there's a significance to doing philosophy because we can complete our work here. Socrates says, where I'm going after they put me to death for being a philosopher, because that's just what people do until they realize the significance of philosophy. I'm going to a place with better men and gods than you'll find here. The sorts of human beings who have completed their work here. So we have work to do while we're here. We have a reason for being here. We have something that we can do. And it's not something personal, or, well, it's personal, but it's not something subjective. It's not something based on opinion. It's something true, objective. And Socrates is helping us understand what that exactly is. Of course, he's identifying it as philosophy, but philosophy is one of the most misunderstood things in the world, even at Socrates' time, and definitely in our time. So we have to figure out what exactly it is, and he's giving us the material that we can reflect on to do that. That's why we read. We are engaged in understanding what philosophy is. We can't stay at the level of opinion. There's a significance to rising above opinion that Socrates outlined here in what we just read. We are trying to ourselves reach that which is unopinable. So we're reaching beyond opinions to that which itself is not touchable in opinion. So how do we touch it? Well, we're learning what philosophy is something to do with dianoia, a kind of understanding directed towards the realm of being. Not only that, we seek to experience and validate and verify our understanding for ourselves in direct experience, and they call that nous or noesis. Socrates points out, by the way, that's the same thing as dying. To reach it, you have to separate your soul from the body. That's what happens when you die. So he encourages all fellow philosophers to hurry up and go to where he's going as soon as we can. Not through suicide, of course, but through the art and practice of death and dying that is the essence of philosophy. Now, through the fact that it's an art means it has some sort of benefit and knowledge attached to it. That's the Greek idea of art. Of course, we need to see this in the text. Maybe when we jump into the Republic, we'll see that. But for now, that's important because, again, in a world without philosophy, where we're sort of taught that everything is opinion and there's no truth. So it's just might makes right. Whatever is the most common or powerful opinion, that's probably more right than others. Various levels of that kind of approach to reality is common in our time, and as such, our understanding of art is similarly ambiguous or rejected, or chalked up to personal opinion. But if there is a true understanding of art, we would have to look to something that is objective, something that is true, something that is universal, something that is understandable and knowable for all those able and willing to share in that kind of reflection. Not everybody is going to be like, oh, I'm happy with my own prejudices. And hey, welcome to the chat. First time chatter. We are in the Phaedo. So, art, of course, for the Greeks, something that is to do with knowledge and extensive benefit. So we don't just want to separate ourselves through the many other kind of yogas that are out there that does not have understanding and knowing. There is a significance to the path of the spiritual experience, the initiation, Socrates is calling it in the text we're reading. There's a significance to that going through our understanding, what we call the logos. And the structure of that is the dialectic. When that's directed towards where we go, that realm of being, that's something called dianoia. Now, these are 3 Greek words that we are learning the meaning of. And this is important because if we don't have the terms for these things in our language, we might miss them. We might not value them. And of course, we are learning what philosophy is and distinguishing it from what it isn't, because it's the most misunderstood. It's the most plagiarized. It's the most, what's the word? Slighted, defamed thing out there. And we trace the historical causes for that to the movement away from Socrates and the Greek tradition and the Greek language to the Latin tradition that we are currently playing out the implications of. And one significant feature of Latin is they don't have a word for the. And as we're seeing in the text, the beauty itself as a noun, the makes something a noun. The beautiful, the just, the good. These are the objects of our interest in philosophy. In the Latin tradition, they're not open to us because we don't have that word. We're stuck at the level of adjectives or the reflections of the nouns in their physical, reflected in the physical nouns. So the nouns are the substantives that we can perceive through our physical senses, like a dog or a painting or a person. These can have these nouns as adjectives: a beautiful person, a beautiful puppy, a beautiful painting. But we can't ask the question, well, what is the beauty itself? I have a friend who is from a country that doesn't have a word for the. And he used the word with his parents once and they laughed at him. They called him silly. He asked for the apple. You can't ask for the apple in his culture. You can ask for a apple. And he was mocked for doing that. Of course, this is where we are in Western culture. We are at the level of one of the causes for us not having awoken philosophy. One of the causes for where we're at is a language that does not have the word the. So we can't ask the philosophical question. We can't look at equal sticks and say, what is the equal itself? We can't look at beautiful people and say, well, what is beauty itself? And Socrates is outlining for us, hey, this is where we all start. We all start captured by our physical senses. Seeing through our physical senses, a lover of the body, seeking riches and fame and the things that are pleasure, seeking pleasures and pains as well from the physical body. But that's where we have to engage a love of learning and ask that question. And of course, last time we pointed out, when we start as a lover of learning, we start learning, we look for information, we look for how to think, and we direct our thinking to something. That's where we start. And of course, we want to move from there to here. The information, look at the many examples or adjectives reflecting beauty. beautiful things. But we want to ask, what is beauty itself? And now we're in the game of philosophy. And then in the game of philosophy, our information becomes the self-logos. Beauty, justice, goodness, soul. Where do we go when we die? Mind, self. These are the terms, and then we have to, how do we think? The structure of the dialectic, directed towards what? The realm of being. These are the things that distinguish dianoia, this new word, from our normal idea of understanding. So, if we can't ask that in our modern tradition, and if you go to school, if you learn philosophy, you're probably not going to learn real philosophy because of this, because of the Latin tradition that lacks the word the. So too, we might not be able to do philosophy if we don't have a word that means this. The information of self-logos used through the dialectic, directed towards the realm of being. And Socrates points out for us, by the way, this is the kind of activity that leads to the separation of the soul from the body and the experience of that realm of being. We have a quote. Here we go. Here's a quote. Self-justice itself, beauty itself, good itself, the ousia, which is another Greek word that we need. That is the nature of those beings, the essence of those beings in the metaphysical realm. All of those selves and being is contemplated not through the body, but whoever prepares themselves by most accurately dianoiaing each self-investigated. They will approach the closest to the nous, the intuitive knowing of each being. But look how important that quote is. This is essential for philosophy, because we want to move beyond not only opinions to understanding, not only understanding the way that we normally think of it directed towards the physical world, but the dianoia understanding directed towards these objects in particular, so that we can verify it in knowledge, nous. Now, nous isn't something that European philosophers acknowledge. Or you go to school, you learn theories, but they don't talk about knowledge, which is a key difference. You can't know whether the theory is true. You just have an opinion about it. That's science. This is what makes philosophy important. You don't want to settle with just opinion. We want to know what we are. We want to know where we're going, and we want to know what the nature of the good and justice is, because, as Socrates is pointing out, all of our conflicts are a result from not being here, from being in the realm of opinion and chasing things of the physical senses, more stuff for you. So we want to overcome our problems, purify ourselves from our problems, and also perfect our understanding in this way and verify our understanding in the direct experience. We talk about our saying, you wouldn't send your slave to the banquet. If there's something fantastic that's on offer, you'd want to go there yourself. And we want to go there ourselves. And that's what makes one way of understanding the difference between philosophy and the misunderstanding of philosophy. And so we have to introduce these kind of words so that we can recognize them, which takes a bit of practice. Dianoia. Self-logos. That's not in English. Dialectic kind of is, but we have to really nail down what it is exactly. It's misused. People often talk about Hegelian dialectic, which means the back and forth of the physical world. Of course, the physical world isn't like being, where it's eternal, immortal, pure, all of these adjectives that we're picking up from the text. The physical world has a kind of logos, shadow of a logos, which is a back and forth between opposites, hot and cold, pleasure and pain, these sorts of things. At the start of the Phaedo, Socrates says, hey, if Aesop was to make a fable about pleasure and pain, he would talk about a monster with two bodies and a single head. A one-headed monster. Because pleasure and pain are opposites, but there might be a hyparxis out of the physical world in which the two are unified in a special way. That's how the whole thing started. And in his arguments, we've seen a few different hyparxises. He's pointed out in the text that, oh, by the way, the good, justice, beauty, all of the beings, lesser, greater, equal, all of these things that we're interested in philosophy, they themselves have a single head. That's self-ousia, the hyparxis, or the point, the fullest flowering. That's the being. That's the object of knowledge. That's what we're seeking to remember through learning. In fact, all physical things seek that and benefit others through reminding us of that. We wouldn't ask what is beauty itself unless we started by seeing beautiful things. We wouldn't ask what equality is unless we saw two sticks and thought, hey, they look equal. And your friend said, not to me, it doesn't. He's looking from a different angle. But you wouldn't say, hang on a second. I can see why two adjectives, or sticks as a noun that has the adjective of the self-logos, a self-logos adjective like beauty or equal, I can see why the adjective equal could be seen differently depending on the angle that you're looking at the sticks. But would equality itself, self-equal, the being of equality, could that ever be not equal? Of course not. That wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't be what it is. So this is the question that brings you into the game of philosophy. Now we recognize that, hey, when you direct this towards being, you're gaining something called wisdom, which is a virtue, which is something you have to practice at all times, using this as the paradigm in your life. But when you get there, there is a kind of upgrade or a spiritual initiation where the virtues, desiring it at all times, temperance, holding on to this as true even though you might feel differently because of your education, because of pleasures and pains and fears and desires, holding on to this as being what is true, the virtue of courage. The third virtue, wisdom, we just mentioned. And of course, functioning in this way at all times, justice. You trade those in for the single gold coin for an aces. A kind of virtue, a kind of application of all of your practice, learning, discipline, of doing this with the four virtues, where you not just experience it, like somebody might have a drug trip or a meditation experience, or just get lucky and have a sudden experience of beauty. But because we're bringing the Logos with us, we can understand it. So already philosophy is a more complete tradition than other spiritual traditions, simply because we have a way of understanding where we are. Socrates points out, by the way, your dialectic and self-logos, your understanding, not only is learning about it, it's learning what it's not. The dialectic has two parts, what it is and what it isn't. So we're learning about what philosophy is, and we at the same time have to understand what it isn't, so we can recognize con artists, charlatans, and not be blue-pilled or red-pilled by the Red Pill podcast, who claim to be philosophers, claim to tell you what the reality is, but they're con artists. They're completely wrong, and they're giving a bad name to philosophy. Okay, equally so, our self-logos and dialectic directed towards being can give us what it is, but also it can purify us from our false beliefs, what it isn't. And that's where we are in the text. CB's ask philosophy, that's great. Philosophy is about separating the soul from our senses to understand being. But what if we have fears about death? Because doesn't everybody fear death? Socrates says, hush, hush, boy, not I. Because philosophy is understanding and experiencing it, the art of death and dying. So you have a false belief that you must be purified from, because if you do get there, whatever way, if you have a false belief that isn't purified, you might fear it, reject it, run away from it. And in your final death, you might reincarnate. You might not stay in that realm and continue to evolve upwards through reality. You might fear it and reject and, oh no, he does not fear death. So we're reading the Phaedo. So in the chat, Socrates doesn't fear death. So in the Phaedo, it's Socrates' last day before he's put to death. His friends are all sad because they fear death. And Socrates says, I'm going to have to make a good defense for philosophy. More convincing than I was to the actual jury, who I didn't convince enough people that what I was doing is good and beneficial. I was a gift from God. But maybe I can convince you. So he's engaging in a conversation about the kinds of fears his friends have. The way in which he talks, we're looking at and we're learning and we're trying to apply ourselves, because that way of using his dianoia, understanding, and his knowledge is to benefit his friends and us. So he's talking to us through time. We want to understand how he uses it so we can think in that way ourselves. This is how to think. That's where we're at in the text. So if we get to being, we want to have been purified from our false beliefs, but also perfect our understanding, these two things, what it is and what it isn't, so that we don't fear it, don't reject it, don't reincarnate down if it's our last death, but also go into it deeper and maybe even use this learning and the virtue to continue the game even while we're there. Socrates says, by the way, if you can separate from your physical senses, you're going to have more time for philosophy. Right, good question. If his will is leaving him, how could he not fear death? So that's one of the ideas, that when you die, you will lose something of your soul, your will, your planning, and some desiring aspect. So the way of understanding the soul we have that we're playing with is that there's three, like a snowman. We have an inward desire in our body. We have an outward desire. So we want sandwiches. We have something that we can call a will that motivates us to act in the world outwardly. And we have a reasoning part, a planning part. The reasoning is the smallest. And he said, by the way, we all start in the physical world until we come across someone like Socrates and realize there is actually a more real world called being. And so most people are motivated by this part of their soul and they seek riches. Some people are motivated by this part of the soul and they seek honor. They want to act in the world where they get fame, be Instagram famous or something, or be well known. The few people who desire this smallest part to become lovers of learning, these are the sorts of people who can get into this game. A lover of learning becomes a lover of wisdom, and a lover of wisdom, which is the word philosophy, by the way, philosophia, becomes philophrenesis. So the virtues that we talked about, the practice of this, we trade in for the single virtue of phrenesis, which is a kind of phrenesis that doesn't lose its power. So it will come with us wherever we go, even in our next lives. So if we're here for anything, it's likely to be something to do with this. So that when we do experience the realm of being, the dialectic and logos that we have been using as our method has purified ourselves from what is false, our fears of death, our fear that we will lose our will, or the fear that we will break apart and be scattered to the wind. It will have an understanding so we can recognize it. We talked about the significance of understanding today with understanding words. If you don't have a word for the, you won't look for it. If you don't have a word for self-logos, you won't recognize it. If we have developed our understanding, we can recognize where we're at, going deeper. But in the third part of the learning is the virtues, so that when we do get there and we do understand it, and we have been purified from our fears, we can integrate it into ourselves through the virtues. Hold on to it. And so the three parts of the soul again. So we can desire this with this part of our soul. We can know it's true, even if our physical world throws us ups and downs, pleasures and pains. And we can use it for our reasoning as the paradigm, the model. So if we integrate our experience, we have a kind of learning that we can take with us. Right, so the question in the chat, how could Socrates believe there is an afterlife if his will is leaving him? Wouldn't he correlate it to his ability to reason is leaving him? So statistically, it must be heartbreaking. Right, so this is one of the beliefs, that when you leave your body, your soul, you lose something other than your physical body, right? First of all, for Socrates, it's not a belief. It's a practice. If death is separating this soul of the body, these three aspects of our psyche, from the body, that's called contemplation. If you concentrate on something, like the questions that we give birth to in philosophy, if you sustain that concentration, that's called meditation. And if you sustain your meditation on one of the aspects of being, that's why it's important to have questions about philosophy, beauty itself, justice itself, reality itself, the soul itself, the afterlife itself. Then if you sustain your focused meditation on it, you can join with it. That's called contemplation. In Greek, that's called nous. So you actually go there. So once you're there, it's not a belief. You're there, you're looking around, you're seeing it, you're experiencing it. We need the word nous because we don't really have a word for knowledge pertaining specifically to being, just like we don't have a word dianoia, which is understanding directed towards being. So there's a kind of progression. In the Republic, Socrates lays out for us the whole hierarchy of cognitive functions, from image thinking to belief to dianoia to knowledge. So we start with belief, by the way. There's a reason for listening to Socrates, but we want to develop our own understanding as a way of purifying ourselves to have knowledge of it. But you're right. What if, when we do experience this, we lose something? We lose our consciousness. We lose our will. We lose our ability to think. That's where we are in the text. So let's jump back into the text. Socrates outlines his defense of philosophy. That's his, what is it called? His doctrine. At the beginning, let's go back to where that is. Socrates' doctrine. And we have to turn our soul around because self-justice, beauty itself, the good itself, greatness, health, strength. In one word, the ousia. Ousia is the nature of being. Of course, it doesn't have a physical form. So what makes beauty different from justice? What makes justice different from greatness? Ousia. Ousia is the Greek word that's mind. Mind that has the ability to turn around upon itself. So all of these things you could call ousia, and they are only contemplated not through the body, but those who most accurately understand, and the word is dianoia here, they become closest to the experience, the knowledge, noesis. We have to purify ourselves so we can attain truth of reality, and also this virtue called phronesis, which we're still trying to figure out what it is. We follow the logos, which is the body is a kind of corrupting agent. It fills us with passions, desires, fears, illusions, foolishness, and is the cause of all of our war, civil discord, and battles in the world. And if we stay in the body, we'll be enslaved to its care and we'll have no leisure for philosophy. And even if we do have time to reflect in this way, the body falls in and presents itself in a clamor, pouring in and drives us out of our mind. So we want to be in a pure state, liberated from our physical body, death, so that we can behold the self realities. Self in the Greek means honorific, the highest excellence, beauty itself. So when we talk about self, beauty as a descriptor, self as an adjective, it refers to the aspects of this object of knowing. Before the physical world was the metaphysical world. And we also are learning about what it is as we read the text. It gives us the material for us to do our own essay on it, which is a practice of the dialectic. Dialectic is a practice. You make your own little essay using the adjectives he gives us. So we have to liberate ourselves from our attention to the body, and he outlines the yoga. What's the yoga? In this one paragraph here. This purification, that is philosophy, is to separate the soul from the body as far as possible and to be accustomed to gather herself together from all quarters and to collect self by self, which is a strange kind of puzzle, that expression. To collect self by self out of the body. And so there's a kind of will even out of the body, and dwell alone by self as far as you are able, both now and in the future, being liberated from, as it were, the chains of the body. This liberation and separation of the soul from the body is called death. Let's highlight that. So he's telling us what death is. It's not a loss, it's a liberation. You have more will, you have less distraction, you have less problems or ills. So those who practice philosophy in the right way are most eager to liberate their self. And this liberation and separation of the soul from the body is the self-exercise. Remember, self means honorific. It's the best, it's the excellence, it's the best exercise of the philosophers. So, a philosopher is spending his whole life to be as close as possible to being dead and live in this way. And so when this death comes, wouldn't it be absurd that he would be disturbed, perturbed? Wouldn't it be crazy that he would fear death if he's been trying to get there his whole life and living in that way? Separating from his physical pleasures and pains and senses as much as possible, engaging in this reflection, reading these works, putting the pieces together, doing the exercise. It's an exercise that we do. So, those who practice philosophy correctly are not trying to be alphas. They're not trying to be famous. They're not trying to get rich. They're not trying to have the most successful, YouTube show on YouTube. They're not trying to become rulers of the planet. They are studying to die. And so they fear death least of all human beings, because they're eagerly desirous to have their soul self by self. And by the way, they've yearned for a kind of virtue that comes, something called phronesis, kind of innate power that we have that never loses its power. So this has been a puzzle all the way through. What exactly is phronesis? This translator translates it as mindfulness, but of course that's not good enough. We want the Greek. What is phronesis? It's a kind of crossing over and liberating from the body. That's the true philosopher, is firmly convinced that he will only get pure phronesis nowhere else but there. So, if this is the case, wouldn't it be quite irrational for such a person to fear death? And then he goes into the opposites. If you're not a lover of this kind of learning we call wisdom, philosophy, and you're not a lover of this integration into your being as a way of being that you practice your whole life and forever, even after the life, remember, the yoga, separate from the body, be accustomed to gather yourself out of the body. to dwell there alone. Don't just become a metaphysical tourist and fly around. Like, bring yourself together as far as you are able, both now and in the future. So that integration of that experience as a way of being now and in the future is something to do with this ultimate goal, phronesis. If you're not a lover of philosophy or phronesis, you are a lover of the body, philosomatos, lover of soggy tomatoes. So soggy tomatoes, somatos. And you're going to be to some degree a lover of riches or a lover of honors. One of these or both. And these are not the true virtues. We call them virtues. But hey, if you fear death, but you run at, the army because you fear even greater calamities if you don't, then are you really brave? Or is that the shadow of courage? If you're motivated by fear and you're doing it out of necessity, is that really courage? What if you don't fear death, but you understand it and you desire it? Wouldn't that be the true virtue of courage? Likewise, temperance, to be in control of your desires. If you master some pleasures in order to be mastered by others, you master your drinking problem to become a better gambler, that's not really temperance. Or sound-mindedness, they call it here. So these are the vices. Having some of the qualities of the virtues not directed towards being, towards dianoia, the understanding of being, and the desire to experience it and practice it. So the only valid currency that you have the four virtues that you put in through kind of a work, discipline, practice, but it's fun. Philosophy is the most fun game in town. It's the most meaningful, interesting. It has the ability to purify you from your problems. So it's the kind of paradigm for psychotherapy. It should be. In fact, it is the new paradigm. There's some work. The recent developments in the field have all been based on the work of Dr. Pierre Grimes, people influenced by him. And his book outlining this new paradigm for solving human problems is called Philosophical Midwifery. So this is the paradigm for psychotherapy, but also it's the paradigm for true spirituality. It's experiencing the nature of the metaphysical. It's a separation from so that's the spiritual part of it. It's a yoga. Yoga means process of joining. So it's the yoga, but it's also through understanding, not through belief or luck, or having to sit under a waterfall for 40 years. So it's a complete understanding of psychotherapy and personal development or spirituality. And integrating that is the only real currency that you practice this for. Phronesis. Equals having that experience upgrades your virtues and is a rite of initiation. And if you go to the afterlife without this, uninitiated, number one, so without the experience, and unaccomplished in your purpose in philosophy, then you will lie in a barbarous bog. You will be in the mud in the afterlife. Those who get to the afterlife having been purified and perfected, there's 1 and 2, will dwell with the gods. And he said, therefore, as the saying goes, many are the staff bearers, few are the actual inspired mystics, and those are the ones who have practiced philosophy correctly. So Socrates is saying, hey, I'm not going to mince words. If you're interested in spirituality, it's philosophy. But aren't there a lot of people who claim to be spiritual and they carry the staff that makes them look like they're spiritual? Yeah, many people carry the staff. But the actual mystics are philosophers. And It's Socrates, the father of Western thought, someone who has definitely showed a mastery of the logos, a mastery of the dialectic, a mastery of the dianoia. He's speaking from experience. He's able to use his mastery to benefit not only the people in this conversation, but us more than 2,000 years later. So there's a reason for trusting him. Thumbs up. But of course, one of the reasons why we trust him is he's not just telling, hey, believe me and start a religion. He's giving us the material for us to exercise our focus, our will, our attention, our problem solving. Not just problem solving, you have to discover the problems first. So they're your questions, giving birth to your own questions and exercising your mind in a specific way where you can solve the questions. It's like the archetype of the hero's journey or the archetype of a video game. You have to discover the puzzles, you have to discover the solutions, you level up along the way. And the more you level up, the more your character increases. The more you can see that will miss the attention of those who haven't leveled up. Like if you have a thief character in a video game, you can recognize traps because he's leveled up that skill set. So it's the archetype. It's the hero's quest for all human beings, and it's the highest. It's the self-hero's quest, you could say. And therefore, he is providing the material for us to play the game. That's why this podcast involves reading a text. That's why this podcast involves a lot of reflection, going over again and again what we see. And every time we learn more, we gain a greater amount of seeing, so that when we go over it again, we can see more and more and level up more. That's what makes philosophy different. Other philosophy podcasts probably don't have this. They're not actually exercising in it. They're not actually doing it. They're interviewing people on their opinions. What do you think death is? Interesting. Well, okay, that was a nice conversation. We're all going to walk away with the same opinions we started with, because that's what opinions are. However, understanding is not personal. It's universal. It's objective. So therefore, if there's a path that leads us to something that can unify ourselves in understanding and unify the world that is divided based on opinions, but can come together based on understanding, that's what we want to do. And that's real philosophy. And Socrates is teaching us how to do it while giving us the material to exercise it on. Hey, this is how you play the game. Like, it's like the tutorial level, but he's also giving you creatures to slay to level up. Meaning we have good reason to start by trusting him, but we're actually leveling up to go beyond trust to our own seeing, our own understanding, while understanding what it is, which is fantastic, which is genius. So I'm not going to be disturbed. I'm going to have no complaints, because I'm going to find good masters and good friends where I'm going. And this is my defense of philosophy. And if I was more persuasive to you than the Athenian jury, who are a bunch of dopes and wanted to kill me, they don't realize how great I am, then hopefully I've been more persuasive to you. So, but then Cebes, so he's talking to his friends Simmias and Cebes. There's, I think, 13 people there. We actually counted the amount of people there, because the things that we're learning are, yes, 13. 8 foreigners and 5 countrymen. So there's 13, and with Socrates 14. So the things that we're learning are being represented mythologically. Socrates says that. He goes, hey, I'm going to here we go. Top of page 8, bottom of page 7. We're going to thoroughly examine and mythologize about that place and the journey to that place and what kind of place we think self is. But what else should we do before the sun sets? This is how it starts. This is the Socrates' opening statement. For us, we have a certain amount of time here. What should we do rather than thoroughly examine where we're going and the nature of that place, and not just understand it and examine it and experience it and practice going there and integrate it to our whole way of being at all times to make it a virtue, but we should mythologize about it. Use this kind of dialectic and understanding in your art. Share it. Make a story about it. Take all of the key terms and turn them into key characters in your story. Socrates said, hey, my dreams have been commanded me to make music. I thought it was encouraging me to do philosophy because philosophy is the greatest music. That's why the god representing philosophy is Apollo, also the god of music. That's why we have a lyre there up in the corner. It's like a little instrument. But actually, I'm thinking, well, maybe he wasn't just egging me on like you encourage a racer in a race. Maybe he's actually commanding me to make popular music. So I am going to compose myths as well as discourses. But because I'm not used to being a myth maker, I'm going to use the myths of Aesop, Aesop's fables. We know these even now. So when you are making myths, you could use popular music or popular characters. I like to use Spider-Man. So when I talk about how the soul relates to beauty or how the soul relates to death, I talk about how Spider-Man relates to Captain America or something like that. And ultimately, I want to write my own movies and video games, and all that will be is a representation of this, which is my own understanding that I have for myself through the help of Socrates from the Logos in the text, that is a kind of stepping stone to the experience of it, death itself, but also an understanding of that experience of that place so that we can integrate it, making it a virtue that is a kind of learning that goes beyond this lifetime. And therefore, if we're here to do anything before the sun sets, it would be to learn something that we can take with us. It wouldn't be to collect riches or to get famous. How long is that going to last? Even if you do get there. But if it's a learning in your soul that you can take with you onto the next levels, the next dimensions of reality, then that's probably the learning we're here to do. And we're understanding that for ourselves. So, CB says, fine, but I fear that my soul will separate when I die. I will lose things. I'll be scattered to the wind. I'll break apart. Can you help me by purifying me from that problem, from that false belief about death? So Socrates here, this is his doctrine. He talks about how philosophers do not care about clothes and riches and Bugattis because that's all things of the physical body. So this is his doctrine. So we went back to the start, talk about mythologizing. Right, so then CB says, by the way, there are some people who feel like in death our soul departs like breath or smoke and is scattered to the wind, undone. And we have a fear of death that we will in no way exist. And then Socrates uses his dialectic in a conversation with him. And so in the previous videos, by the way, if you're joining me on Twitch, you'll find the previous videos on the YouTube channel that you can find below. We went through the effort, and I encourage you to not just take the conclusions that I'm recapping, but to go through it yourself. His 3 arguments that the soul is immortal. Here we go. These 3 here. the Enderman example. We have to keep coming around, otherwise we'd all end up asleep. We'd be run out of resources if we weren't coming to life from somewhere that was non-physical. And also the cyclical nature of the physical world. If there's a dying and a being alive that we can see, then it's the opposite. There's a being dead and a coming to birth again. And then CB's jumped in and said, well, by the way, I can give another argument as to why our soul must be immortal. The idea of learning as recollection. If all learning, and of course we referenced the Meno, where he shows someone who has no understanding of math that he actually knows the Pythagorean theorem. All he has to do is ask him the right questions. And judge his answers, of course. If all learning is recollection, we necessarily have learnt that thing we recollected in a previous time. That would be impossible if our soul were not somewhere before we came to exist in this human form. Therefore, the soul is likely immortal. And we recognize, hang on a second, that was a very succinct argument, which had 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. That sounds like the 1, 2, 3, 4 steps of the dialectic itself. Definition, demonstration, division, and synthesis analysis. It was a really succinct Cebes who was more familiar with this logos of learning as recollection and therefore has spent more time with Socrates, has done all right in his learning of the dialectic. Simmias, of course, was the one who said, I'm not really familiar with this. So after he does this, his friend Simmias says, I'm not as familiar with this learning of, this idea of learning as recollection. Can you help me understand? So we can judge Cebes' development up the ladder of personal development as here, and Simmias is probably a bit lower. And we can judge, he did pretty well. He used the dialectic, 4 stages. Defined the argument, demonstrated it, divided it up into its reasoning. And from that division, if it is, leads to something that shows it's true, or if it isn't, leads to a contradiction that shows that the opposite must be true. Therefore, we've got a good reason to change our mind. Be convinced. Learn. And then came to a conclusion, synthesized his arguments, and analyzed it, applied it back to his first statement to see something about that first statement in a new way. And that's what we do in philosophy. We go through this, all learning is going through this, and then we realize through our learning that we see something that we thought that we knew already, but we see it in a new way having gone through the dialectic. We've purified and perfected ourselves in a certain kind of a way. Cebes said this, and Simmias says, hang on a second, I'm not really following, can you break it down? Cebes couldn't use it with another person. He couldn't help another person learn. So he wasn't at that level of mastery. So this is why we call this a true art. We can use it to benefit our friends. And wouldn't the greatest benefit be helping them understand the truth about learning, the truth about reality, the truth about the soul, and at the same time purifying themselves from what is false? Socrates jumped in and engaged in a dialectic with him. And so while we had a brief definition of the dialectic in Cebes' argument, we had a demonstration of the dialectic in the conversation between Socrates and Simmias. That was really cool. So we're learning how to use it in an artful and beneficial way. So he gives the argument as to why the soul has to be immortal and has to have existed beforehand, and it has to be a cyclical process, reincarnation. So even though we might not believe it ourselves, if we have integrity, if we're philosophers, if we love learning, and we're not tied to our past beliefs, we should change our mind. Trusting reasoning and understanding, the logos and dianoia, even though it's not a common opinion, even though we're not used to it, even though we might have been brought up with other beliefs about death, that's courage. That's the virtue of courage. It takes courage to trust what is true, even though it doesn't feel right. You might still fear death, even though the arguments showed us, oh, you shouldn't. That's courage. To hold on to what's true, even though it doesn't feel right, or comfortable, or familiar, or even if your friends laugh at you, even if your family disowns you. We all believe that death is this is our religion. Well, actually, you don't have to be in one religion or this religion and fight other religions and start a holy war and bring the world to an end, maybe, Armageddon. We can all share an understanding that's objectively true. You just have to awaken philosophy, the quest of man. We talked about how that is a stage of human evolution. This strong, blind allegiance to the traditions and the beliefs of your group kept cavemen alive. The way of being inside our cave is the right one. Everything outside the cave is dark and scary. Saber-toothed tigers. Now that might have been necessary for us to evolve until we learnt language, until we learnt logos, until we could awaken philosophy. But now that is the cause of our human problems. My group good, other group bad. Democrats versus Republicans. My country versus your country. My religion versus other religions. Heathens versus believers. Rich versus poor. It's all that same way of thinking. Philosophy isn't competitive, isn't us versus them. It's a hierarchy we're all on. We're all adventurers.
You're a wizard, Harry.
So, here's Enderman. Enderman is a boogeyman that is asleep, like a zombie. And he said, by the way, if we didn't wake up from sleep, we'd all, like we can see people going to sleep, but if we didn't wake up in the morning, everyone in the world would be asleep. We'd all be like Enderman. Therefore, same thing with death. Because there's a principle of movement of hot and cold, back and forth, pleasure and pain. That's a principle of the physical world. So, Seabees was not happy with this. So we got the idea of learning. By the way, all of the beings, equality, greater, lesser, all the beings, beauty itself, goodness itself. Notice the word self there, talking about beings. That's why we have to be in this translation. Otherwise, we're going to miss the whole essence of philosophy. We'll miss the key terms that can open up the questions and give us what we need to solve them. Level up. Everything, all of those beings, beauty itself, goodness itself, justice itself, holiness itself, that which we stamp the seal, that which absolutely is, both when asking questions and answering questions. So we use this as our focus in the dialectic, but also we use it in questions and answers. That's been a puzzle. What should change our mind? How do we know that the dialectic is good? Why is hypocrisy bad? Because a lot of politicians, they don't think hypocrisy is bad. They don't give a shit. Who cares? Yeah. One rule for me, different rule for thee. But that's good because screw the Democrats. Yay. Because screw the poor people. Yeah, the billionaires don't have to pay taxes. But isn't that hypocritical? Who cares? We care because the dialectic shows us we need to care, because dialectic shows us that is the standard for what is wrong. It's the standard for what changes our mind. If there is a contradiction necessarily and a lack of beauty in something, the opposite would follow. Likewise, if the argument of what follows has a logical necessity and we can recognize a kind of beauty in it, a beauty and goodness, then we should change. That's the right argument. And if we're not doing that, we're not learning. We're tying ourselves to vice, injustice, ignorance. This is the importance of learning the dialectic in school, day one. Next time, politician or a businessman or any tyrant of any kind, there's different principles for different people. That's hypocrisy. So what? Oh, so we all know that that's the cause of injustice and harm to our souls and the planet and the human race. So we have to do the opposite. That's the standard for thinking. That's the standard for being a rational person. Because it's the third step in the dialectic, leading to a fourth step, the conclusion. That's what it means to think, to understand. And understanding will not only solve our problems, inner problems and outer problems, but it was our path to our destiny. So we escape our fate and reach our destiny. So learning is a recovery of innate knowledge. Cebes, and that satisfied Simmias. Okay, yep, I've gone through that. All of these things had the same ousia. All of those beings, the beautiful, the good, every ousia, therefore existed according to a hyparxis prior to our physical birth. And so too with our soul. We have our individual souls, but we must have also had a hyparxis. And it was the same hyparxis as ousia, so that's how we knew those things that we can recognize. We recognize beauty even before we learn about it. We recognize equality or sameness even before we learn about it. And our learning is to recall it, both in understanding and nous, experience. Therefore, our soul had to exist before we were born, for us to have learnt knowledge there, because we don't learn it here. So is that good enough? Well, it was for Simmias, but not for Cebes. He still said, hang on a second. I still think that maybe we lose our souls to the wind. We scatter. We lose our will. We lose our planning. We lose our sense of self. You've sufficiently convinced me that through the dialectic that we must have existed prior to birth. But what about after death? Socrates says, that's kind of in the argument, so I have, but I will keep going. I'm not going to make you feel bad because you're not as smart as me, or you didn't learn as quickly. No, philosophy is not that. That's anti-philosophy. That's debate. My opinion's right, and I'm going to prove it by making you look stupid or feel stupid. Philosophy is the opposite of all of the other ways that we think about philosophy. True philosophy. You help people recognize they are noble and divine. It's a game we all can play. And the reason is simple. If there is a being that is understandable and rational, and also verifiable in knowledge, you don't have to prove your opinions right by defeating other ones. Because we're not in the realm of opinion. We're better than that. So, I made you look foolish. Well, you know what? That person hasn't changed his mind. That person hasn't been made better. He just feels bad about himself or hates you. And his followers aren't going to change their mind. And you know what that leads to? War, conflict, division, wealth inequality, genocide. All philosophy different than this is just an aspect of that same problem. So he didn't do that to Cebes here. Okay, we're gonna walk the path again. That's what we do. We repeat this. I was specific about this. We repeat this doctrine. That's what the virtues are. It's a practice. We're gonna practice the virtue of logos dialectic towards being. That's pretty much all the virtues. And also, it's our way to upgrade ourselves. It's a way to reach nous. So don't keep doing it. I benefit, you benefit, humanity benefits. A win-win-win. very different than all other opinions about philosophy. This is significant. We're learning what philosophy is and we're learning what it isn't. It's the most important thing. It's the most necessary thing. But also it's the most corrupted and misunderstood thing. Thus the significance of awakening philosophy. Oh, so CB says, can you persuade me that this fear that my soul will scatter to the wind, can you persuade me that that's false? Like you were persuading my inner child to fear the boogeyman. Would you like you would persuade a kid that the boogeyman isn't true? Can you do the same to me with this fear that that death is something to be afraid of? Socrates says, sure. And I was pointing out, hey, we don't, I've already said that. What are you, an idiot? I got the tears of the liberals, or that's an L for you. That's a W for me. I've made a win. Ha 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 ha. I really destroyed my opponent. That's bullshit. That's the language of war and injustice. I destroyed him. Like every second YouTube video title. He owned that guy. He destroyed him. No, he did. Philosophy is not that. That's the problem. Without a standard for truth, people are struggling to find, well, what makes something true? Well, our evolution is inside cave good, outside cave bad. That might have helped us with saber-toothed tigers. It doesn't help us anymore. You don't destroy someone to make them better. You don't own someone to help them reach their nobility and divinity. You don't win by exploiting through capitalism the planet and human beings. The opposite. In fact, Socrates says it's necessary to sing to self every day. The kind of reasoning that helps us, all of us, free ourselves from our false beliefs, our boogeymans that we fear. Socrates, it is necessary to sing to self every day until you shall sing them away. Sing them away. Keep this conversation. Philosophy is a conversation, not a debate. It's not a vote. It's a conversation to the truth. Hey, mathematicians don't take a vote on whether or not 1 and 1 equals 2. Why do we have a vote into what's good for the soul, good for humanity? Tyranny, vice. The desire to be the leader of your cave. It's an early remnant of a problem, a solution that solved a problem in our early human development that we have to overcome and pick up the game that Socrates left for us. Awaken philosophy. Where should we find such a good singer of these particulars when you leave us, Socrates? Hey, so Socrates, when you're gone, I don't think there's anyone else who can really help us understand. No one's as wise as you, really. Well, Socrates says, it's a large country, Cebes, and there are some good people in Hellas, and the non-Hellenic races also numerous. So the Hellenic people are probably more familiar with this kind of reasoning, singing, benefiting, art. But you should thoroughly search for a singer and spare no expense in finding someone. It's the most significant thing you can do. There is nothing you should more spend money on other than finding a dialectician, someone who can sing this song. Sing you until you're convinced. What would it take to convince you? What would it take to convince you that you shouldn't be afraid of your own death? Understanding, maybe? Experience? Understanding applied to your experience? Understanding while in the experience of what it's like to be out of your body? Maybe using your understanding while out of the body to go even further, to continue to do philosophy with better men and gods, and maybe even Socrates is there. Maybe that's not even enough. Maybe you also have to go through and find out why you were convinced that death was something to be feared. Who convinced you? Who was the shadow If this is a spiritual initiation, makes you a true mystic, thumbs up. What? The dianoia in being with the virtues, if that's the triad for the spiritual initiation, the learning that is the most important thing to do, that we have to hold on to at all times for it to be a virtue, why the heck are we holding on to this false stuff at all times? This fear of death. If beauty itself and truth itself is the convincing thing, why was I convinced about something that wasn't that? The shadow, the reflection, the appearance, the false appearance of beauty and truth and care and art must have been present. The appearance of those things must have been present in a shadow-like reflection of the true initiation. So maybe that's needed too. Maybe that's the kind of song. A purifying song, purifying from what is false, as well as perfecting towards what is true. Both. The dialectic applied to both. So while there's one method of dialectic, there's the logos, the ladder up, and the shadow. So where will we find that kind of a singer? Well, don't spare any expense looking for one. Literally, if you're only here for a certain amount of years, and that's nothing compared to eternity, use your money for that. But, Socrates goes on, it's also necessary for you to search among one another, for it is likely you will not easily discover those able to do this better than yourselves. Think about it. How many people are really into philosophy? I'm Socrates, goddammit. I'm alive here, right now in Athens. And there's no movies and video games to distract people. How many people are in this game? How many people are with me at the end? I think we numbered 14. How many people subscribe to this channel? How many people can you have this conversation with? We have a Discord. We have a YouTube channel that you can leave comments on. So thankfully with the internet, we are able to find like-minded people and awaken the true quest of humanity. But back then, they had Socrates around. So who's likely going to be the sort of people who can act in this way? Who's going to have a natural interest in philosophy, in learning, number one, more than lover of honor or lover of riches? How many people are interested in capitalism and marketing and finance bros? How many people want to be famous or well-liked by people? Want to get those likes? How many people are interested in learning? A lot fewer. And of those people interested in learning, how many are interested in actually changing their minds and not defending the opinions that they grew up with? In cave good, outside caves bad. And of those people interested in actually learning, seeing where they're ignorant, changing their minds, how many are interested in learning and changing their minds about what is most fundamental, what is most dearly held about the nature of self and reality and beauty and justice? Compared to how many people are willing to fight and die and argue and bitch and complain against what they opine, their opinions about truth and justice. Wars. The pages of human history are soaked in blood because people are more willing to die for their ignorance about what's true and just than actually learn. Philosophy. So that's philomathesis, lover of learning, that becomes a lover of wisdom in the upgrade. When you realize, oh, hang on a second, the things that I'm interested in learning about, tree frogs, all tree frogs are either same or different from each other. Where did the idea of same and different come from? Or what are the principles for tree frogs to have existence? What's this idea of existence? Because I want the tree frogs to exist, because I'm a lover of learning, I'm a scientist. I want them to continue to exist. Wait a minute, what does it mean to exist? Or what are the conditions or causes for existence? Not only that, they're being made extinct by capitalists. What's the cause for people acting in a way that's harmful to other species or the planet? What's the cause of our ignorance? Thumbs up. These sort of questions that you will inevitably be led to whatever you focus on, so long as your learning is directed to excellence. You don't just want common opinions about tree frogs, you want to really understand them. You will necessarily be led to causes. What are the causes for injustice towards tree frogs? And what is the cause for justice? What is justice itself? It's a principle of all, it's called Penrose's principle, by the way. All systems of learning can't be complete and self-sufficient in and of themselves. There must be a higher order creating the conditions necessary for this self-contained system of learning. So whether it's learning math or learning about tree frogs, if you keep going and you don't settle, if you seek excellence, then you'll be led into wisdom. What is being? What is existence? What is justice? What is the cause for sameness and difference, for like and unlike tree frogs? All of those terms I described, they are the self-logos terms. Likeness, unlikeness, same, different, beauty, justice, existence. These are a collection of self-logos terms that we collect on our quest. And Socrates is pointing out in Phaedo, by the way, they all have a hyparxis, they're all self-ousia, and therefore they're all objects of knowledge, and all learning is ultimately to remember that. So you're in the right game. Real learning is remembering, and it's remembering wisdom. Knowledge of the self-ousia that you had before you were born, and we're going back to after. Possibly, depending on how well you've done here, purified and perfected yourself. So how many people go from a lover of learning, philomathesis, to that, lover of wisdom? Therefore, it makes sense that you're more likely to find people capable of being this kind of singer among yourselves. Which is why we have this community, which is why we have this podcast, why we have this channel, why we have this Discord group. Practice our songs. Write your songs. Write your dialectic, your reasoning. Share your insights. Share your learning. Share your challenges. And have coffee. Meet up on Discord. To practice asking the dialectic questions for somebody who has a puzzle or a problem. The logos up or the problem logos, the shadow. And everyone will be benefited. So, and then, as an example of the kind of song, Socrates goes through a dialectic with them. What sort of things do scatter like the wind? Composite things. Is the soul composite like the body, or is it more like being? So this is a trick that he uses, or a trick. It's not a trick. It's a clever way of reasoning. In order to understand whether or not the soul dissipates like the body, or remains itself pure, we have to see the two examples. The body is composite and decays. That's the physical world, but the realm of being doesn't. Therefore, to understand the soul, which is lower than being, we have to first understand being, so that we can compare what's the soul more like. So that's a cool thing some philosophers do. They say, oh, in order to answer your question, we have to understand this more important thing that's going to be more beneficial for you to understand. Just like a doctor. Go into a doctor, oh, I've got this pain in my finger. I'm paying you money to help me fix this pain in my finger. And the doctor realizes the cause of the pain in the finger is a broken forearm or something, or a crack in his forearm. Okay, in order to understand this that you're interested in, we have to first understand this. In order to help your liver, we have to understand your drinking. In order to understand whether or not the soul is immortal, we have to understand that which is like being, which is good because he's giving us a list of adjectives that we can pull out and put into our exercise, put into our dialectic, make our songs about, make our myths about. Self-equal, self-beautiful, self-being. And of course, we have to do the opposite. What isn't? We do A and B. What it is and what it isn't. What it isn't? Humans or horses or clothes. Things that are only equal or beautiful as adjectives, not the nouns. Some more adjectives to pull out. Invisible, formless. That's what being is. By the way, if you're stuck in your physical body and you're not a true philosopher, you'll wander around dizzy and confused, as though self were drunk. But you want to pass into the realm that is, here are some more adjectives, pull them out, write them down, put them on your Word document that you can use for your dialectic and then mythologize in your art. Pure, eternal, deathless. Oh, so we're being forced to learn about that which is more important in order to slay our fear of death. Remains, abides in the same way. So we cease from our wandering. By the way, if you reach there, you will always remain in contact with sameness itself, the same, in the same way, about those beings, insofar as you remain in contact with beings. That state of self is called phronesis. That's what we've been after. We've been after what exactly is phronesis. It's a kind of state of yourself where you remain in contact with these beings. Fascinating.
Wow. Wow.
Talked about rulership. What should rule? Should you be ruled by the body or ruled by the divine? By the way, if you're not a philosopher, you're going to be pulled here and there by your body's urges and impulses, illnesses or desires. Therefore, who's really in charge? But we want to be a good daemon. We want to be free of our ignorance, our fear, our wild desires, and the other human defects. So he's helping us understand the root cause of all human defects. Ignorance, fear, wild desires, all attached to not being a philosopher, being dragged around with the body. And what is philosophy? Practicing philosophy rightly is really practicing to die. Practicing dying. Not that it's the art. Was art involved? Understanding, dianoia, experience, knowledge, nous, the application to benefit through the dialectic. So it's the art. We could unify those into the word art. But also the practice. So we have the art and practice. You're using it as an art, but you're practicing it too, as often as you can. If you don't, you'll be stained and impure when you leave the body in your final death. And because you've been beguiled by the desires and pleasures of self. You've been tricked, you've been beguiled. They're flashy. We can see people who don't reason well are tricked by flashy colors and images. Children's shows, cartoons, lots of flashy colors and shapes and colors. The body is like that. Look at the pleasures, look at the shapes, look at the colors, all flashy. You're being tricked because the cause of those is non-physical, and the pleasure, the pleasure is a much higher order of pleasure. In fact, pleasure is a kind of shadow, true bliss of knowing reality. But here's the problem. You'll be tricked by the desires and pleasures. So it's not the pains and the fears, it's the other side, it's the pleasures and desires. You'll be tricked into thinking nothing else is true other than the physical that you can touch and see and drink and eat and use for sexual purposes. And as a result, that's what is, and what isn't Like, so that's what is if you're in the body, and what isn't in relation to philosophy. You'll be accustomed to hate and fear and avoid that which you can't see with your eyes, but is knowable. That's copy that. The word is intelligible there, but it comes from the word noiton, nous. So, how do we see the objects that we're after, really? Not the eyes. You don't see it with your eyes. Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining Nitro Gold. I hope you have enjoyed this reflection, and feel free to subscribe to, as everybody, the Twitch channel and the YouTube channel. And join the Discord if you want to keep the conversation rolling. But what is knowable and tangible to philosophy? Which makes sense of what he says about looking for singers. People motivated by shapes and colors, they're going to hate and fear and avoid. Hey, what happens when a tyrant or a dictator gets in charge? They go after the intellectuals. They fear and they hate thinkers. You're not one of those damn thinkers, are you? Using your brain and reading them there books. We don't like them book readers around here. They fear and they hate their own mind. Where does that come from? Well, let's think about the evolutionary necessity of fearing the dark world outside the cave, like hundreds of thousands of years ago. Well, if you were thinking for yourself and acting for yourself, you might venture out of the cave and get eaten by a tiger. So therefore, we get taught to hate and fear our own questions, our own reasoning, our own goals, our own selfhood. You have original sin. Don't ask questions. You think too much. Hey, help others. Don't help yourself. That's being selfish. Of course, it's nonsense. Because philosophy is not us versus them. It's win-win-win. So, of course, you're going to find better singers of this song in philosophy because they're not accustomed to hate and fear and avoid philosophy. By being tricked by desires and pleasures to think that's what's most real. What do we call that? Addiction. You get addicted towards what your highest pleasure. Why? Because you think that's what's most true. Therefore, you should be entitled to it. Cause of addiction. Of course, and that opens up the door of understanding how come some sort of sometimes psychedelic therapy, having people through certain psychedelics under certain conditions, if they're lucky, being able to experience something more real than their physical pleasure that they're addicted to, can sometimes break their attachment from their addiction because it's more real. If you don't, you'll be seized by the grip of the corporeal, who keeps company and intercourse with the body and is in its service. You'll make your soul similar to the body. He goes on to say that's nailing your soul to the body. That's the greatest problem of not being a philosopher. A soul is bound by each pleasure and pain nails the soul to the body. The biggest problem from excessive pleasure and pain is to believe that this is most clear and real, which is a question. Why clear and real? We've been talking about what's real. Philosophers seek truth and phronesis. But here he introduces the idea of clear. Because if being is beauty and justice and it's the brilliant light of pure being, that sounds like a very, very full experience. It contains all knowledge. But that doesn't sound clear. So a question that we've been carrying since we read this is there something else? A state of self beyond phronesis and truth or being to do with clear. So those who are familiar with enlightenment states, there's often a state of bliss, and there's often the golden light of pure being, the ultimate level of enlightenment for Taoists. But there is also another state called clarity. People familiar with the ox herding pictures might recognize different states. And of course, we're keeping this question open because we want to see it in the dialectic. If the dialectic is the archetypal model or paradigm for all things, solving problems, reaching destiny, escaping fate, reaching our highest goals, solving the world's problems, helping us, the archetype or paradigm for spiritual development as well, then we should be able to see the levels of spiritual enlightenment within the dialectic itself. Not just believe that there is a state of clarity different from real, but see it, understand why it has to be so. That's philosophy. We're a lover of learning. So that's a puzzle. So the greatest problem of excessive pleasure and pain is you think it's most clear and real, and you nail your soul to the body, and you don't reach what you want, which is what? Oh, and by the way, not just in this life, in your reincarnation, you will never enter into the afterlife in a pure way. You'll be full of the body upon leaving, then you'll fall into another body, and you are rooted to it. For some reason, it won't save the word rooted, but the word here is rooted, like a seed is rooted into the ground. But you cannot be part of the joining with the God in a pure and uniform way. That's what we really want. Communion with the divine company and of the pure and the uniform. It's for the sake of these beings that one who loves... Okay, so here are our practices. This is what we begin with. This is how we start. Level 1 adventurers. What does it mean to be a level 1 adventurer? Love learning. You're not chasing fame or riches, number 1. And number 2, you're practicing the 4 virtues. Orderly is temperance, to be well ordered, not running around like a madman, hedonistically chasing all your pleasures. And virile, that's the will. Virile, to stay true to it. Keep being a hero, even in the ups and downs. When it's hard, when you're afraid, keep holding on to this quest. That's courage. It takes a will. That's a virtue called courage, and the state, or he calls it virile. The energy involved in courage and will and outward moving. So be well ordered and virile. Those are the virtues. Number 1, temperance. Number 2, courage. Directed towards the being's wisdom. There's now 3 virtues. So, one who loves learning and one who practices the virtues want what? These beings. So Socrates, in answering the same question we got from the chat, well, what about after we die? Wouldn't we lose things? Wouldn't we scatter like to the wind? In answering that question, he also snuck in learning about what we really seek in philosophy. Why we love learning, why we become a philosopher, why we practice the virtues. He seeks a higher order of learning to benefit us. Really beautiful and artful way of using philosophy. So what's the sake of, what do we do? Why do we learn? Why do we practice the virtues? For the sake of these beings. The communion with the divine company and of the pure and uniform. So we've got the meaning of life. This is the meaning of life. To do this. It's our object of learning, and it's the purpose for having the virtues. Of course, that can go into, if we've learned this, you can open your document about, which has at the top, Bill's dialectic on philosophy. There should be 2 documents. A, if philosophy is, and B, if philosophy isn't. Of course, is means exists. All of those adjectives we pulled out, pure, eternal, deathless. So what if philosophy exists? Well, we just learned what the meaning of life is, the purpose. So put that into document A, or page A, of your dialectic on philosophy. If philosophy exists, you can know the meaning of life. If philosophy doesn't exist, you can't. And you can explain why. Logically and necessarily follows. And then mythologize it. So you've got episode 1, episode 2. If philosophy exists, if Spider-Man becomes an Avenger, and B, if Spider-Man doesn't become an Avenger. If philosophy doesn't exist, what would happen? And you'd have to represent meaning of life with something. Could be a villain. Mean Lifeo, representing the meaning of life. The villain with the power of manipulating gravity. So Spider-Man defeats Mean Lifeo, the manipulator of gravity. Of course, gravity should represent something to do with the meaning of life, the soul, maybe purpose. The beings, maybe gravity represents the beings. And so the dynamic that plays out within the myth or the drama of your story represents your own personal learning through the dialectic of these. Because it's for these that you do have learning. And you'd be practicing the virtues because you're focusing on the learning, even in your art, even in your creation. Plus, you'd be following the structure of a kick-ass movie, I guarantee. Episode 2, what if Spider-Man doesn't gain superpowers? What if philosophy doesn't exist? Mean Lifeo wins. Spider-Man doesn't defeat Mean Lifeo. And they're representing the idea that we can't know the meaning of life. And you'd create a universe that would follow. What would that universe would be like? What would that universe be like? And it'd be a gift to humanity. Because, hey, what do we have right now? Extreme poverty, extreme wealth inequality, genocide, perpetual war, tyranny, tyrants. All of these unnecessary, easily solvable problems. Why do we have them? Well, this is what happens. This is the kind of universe that follows if philosophy doesn't exist. Why? Mean Lifeo won. Mean Lifeo set up a universe where everyone is being exploited, just like capitalism, just like the military-industrial complex. Yeah, he could have like minions that represent, the military-industrial complex or whatever. And people will look at that and go, hang on, that's what our universe is like. Therefore, they can see, oh, this is just what would necessarily follow in a world where philosophy doesn't exist, and therefore we can't know that there is a meaning of life. Therefore, people chase their own whims and their own ignorances and play out the implications of their prejudices and their tyranny. Yeah. But for the sake of these beings, that we can know the meaning of life and solve those problems in episode 2, where Peter Parker is not bitten by the spider. By the way, once you start to follow the logos, don't fall back. Don't start to follow the logos and then deliver yourself to the pleasures and pains. Don't get wrapped up in your physical body again, because you're going to fall back down. You'll imprison yourself again. Following the logos, you achieve a calm from these emotions, and you always commune with the true and the divine. And you escape from our human ills. But don't labor in vain by giving up and then getting wrapped up in physical stuff again. By the way, we talked about what philosophy is and what it isn't. What it isn't is opinions, even though 99% of philosophy podcasts or teachers or experts or red pill conservative channels think it's about opinions. Socrates is saying, hey, by the way, you behold that which is unopinable. It's out of reach of opinions. It's nothing to do with opinions. So if somebody says, what's your opinion about death? Or what's your opinion about reality? Or what's your opinion about meaning of life? You can say, no, it's nothing to do with opinion. You're asking the wrong question. You can ask what the understanding is. You can ask to share in that understanding, and I can practice the dialectic, and we can step by step walk to understanding together, leaving no one behind. But if you're asking for an opinion, you're asking the wrong question. It's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of truth, which is apprehended through dialectic, through the cognitive function of dianoia, and verified in the cognitive function called nous. Integrated into this practice, the virtues, your learning and your virtues integrated is the state called phronesis, which is a kind of state of the self that doesn't change. You can take it with you into out of the body and in death. Flawed question. We're not interested in opinions. Unless, of course, we're uncovering our own false opinions that we do not suspect that might block us, the shadow. So, and therefore, when we get a calm from our emotions, always commune with the true and the divine, we escape from our human problems. Bingo, bango, bongo. Well done. They all look at the logos. Socrates appeared to be looking at the logos that didn't come from him. Self had spoken. Just like these are not from me. These are not my opinions. Going through, looking at the highlighting things, seeing what the self wants to say. The logos is leading the podcast. I was talking to some new friends, and they asked, "Oh, so you're doing a philosophy podcast? So I guess that you interview people." Well, oh, I don't really. And now we can see why. Because they would be sharing their own opinions. But we're not interested in opinions. That's the cause of the problems. We're interested in truth and phronesis. And also, state of clarity. What the hell is that? New question. Why? Because we want to escape from all human ills, don't we? And don't we also want to achieve a calm and always commune with the true and the divine? So, by the way, if the divine is beauty itself and justice itself, isn't love seeking to commune with beauty, ultimate beauty? For how long? Well, if you have a girlfriend, you might love her, but then sometimes you're away from her. Isn't that painful to be away from your beloved? Oh, so therefore, all human beings seek the true and the divine, a true love, but always, that's romantic talk. I want to be with you till the stars fall out of the sky. It's not possible in the physical world. That's why it's romantic. That's why it's seen as silly or something. But it's okay when you're in love. Well, actually, it's not just romantic. You're just mistaking an adjective beauty, your girlfriend or your beautiful beloved, for the beauty itself, because you can always commune with it in this realm of being, the communion of the divine, the pure and the uniform. That's what we seek. We're all philosophers.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Anyone who's loved anything or desired anything, they love or desire the good and the beautiful. And if it's true as well, you don't want to be tricked. It's not an artificial girlfriend. If you find out that she doesn't truly love you, you're going to be in problems. You don't like that. You want her to truly love you back. We all seek, therefore, the true, the good, and the beautiful. And we all seek it as closely as we can, communion, and we all want it for always. We don't want to be out of love. Heartbreak. Therefore, every single human has a soul that seeks that which is only attainable in philosophy. Therefore, the meaning of life is innate, and can only be achieved through philosophy, as the Logos is pointing us, not as a matter of opinion, but as a matter of understanding that is verifiable in our own direct experience. And that's what Socrates is encouraging us to do. And by the way, if this is what we seek, that would be the ultimate pleasure. And also, if doing so we escape from our ills, we would be avoiding pain. So ultimately, this is the single head where our pleasure and pain go. The back and forth if you're in the physical world, the ups and downs. I'm in love, oh, she dumped me. Happy, sad. I'm hungry, now I'm full. I'm cold and I'm hot. I'm growing and I'm dying. There's a single head where you get both the escape from problems and the ultimate pleasure of always communing with the true, the divine. We can also add the beautiful, the real. So where did this come from? Not me. It came from the text. The Logos. So we can add more about the Logos. Somehow the Logos, in our dialectic of the Logos, what is the Logos? It's something that has a direction. It helps us. It communicates puzzles. It also is from the self. So Socrates was looking at the Logos that self had spoken. The Logos was even controlling or ruling this conversation. Socrates asked them, hey, do you have any questions? Don't hesitate to speak up. Let's discuss it. If you find a more easy way of talking about this, please bring me along too. There must be more apprehensions or objections. Really purify ourselves. Keep going. He just did this. It's his last day on earth. He's outlined his doctrine. He addressed Cebes' question of whether or not the soul is immortal. He answers Simmias' questions of why all learning must be remembering. In answering all three of those things, he talked lots and lots and lots about the nature of being and what philosophy is, the art and practice of death and dying that we seek. We're all philosophers because it's truth, the state of self. It's that for which it's beings, it's the hyparxis, it's the ousia, the object of our learning and our virtues. It can give rise to a special virtue called phronesis that can go beyond this lifetime and doesn't diminish. Said it in three different ways. And what does he say? Oh, I've said it. No, he said, let's talk more. This is the last day on earth. He's done it many times. Each time he helped his friend, he did what he said to do, but also he included the most important. Whether he's talking about what philosophy is, he's talking about reality, being. The Logos and the dialectic of how to get to being. He's talking about, oh, okay, well, that doctrine of philosophy sounds good, says Cebes. But that means the soul must be immortal. Okay, talks about the immortality of the soul. And in doing so, he's contemplating and discussing being again. Oh, the soul must be important because let's talk about being. Whatever he's doing, he's talking about being with the Logos, using the dialectic, so to make it accessible. The next question, okay, all right, so the soul is immortal, but Simmias didn't really follow the idea of learning as remembering. So he talks about the learning as remembering. And while doing that, what's he talking about? What do you remember? Being. How do you remember it? Through philosophy, which is what? The Logos and dialectic. It's three different things. He's talking about the same things. He's demonstrating to us our question, which is what? If the virtues is always directed towards being through the Logos of the self-Logos, how can we do it at all times? He says, don't ever fall, because it's self-imprisonment. The worst kind of imprisonment is self-imprisonment, he says. Self-imprisonment is the greatest assistant of your own imprisonment. So don't fall back. Well, how can we do it at all times? He did it. 3 different conversations. He was doing the same thing, talking about being with the Logos. Contemplating on it, focusing on it, using his highest vision of being, using his highest understanding of the Logos. Vision and understanding. All right, so he convinced, and he used it through the dialectic to help. He wasn't just doing it, he was helping his friends, benefiting himself, keeping the virtues, keeping unimprisoned, not nailing his soul to his physical senses, and also helping, benefiting in the most significant way, and benefiting us 2,000 years later. Wow.
Wow. Wow. Wow. Wow. Wow.
All right, so you've given us our doctrine, you've showed that the soul is immortal, you've helped us understand that learning is remembering. But what about after we die? Isn't our soul scattered? Can you get rid of that fear like you're getting rid of a child's fear of the boogeyman? Yep, sure. And how does he do it? Talking about what the purpose and meaning of life is. What is it? Refraining from the desires, loving learning, and doing the actual virtues and not the vices, because the vices nail your soul to the body, which is going to affect your incarnation and also the way you live here. It's a kind of self-imprisonment. And actually, the purpose of learning, one who loves learning, and the virtues are for the sake of these beings. Talking about the beings again. So, talking about the being through the logos. 4 times he's doing the same thing. Surely, maybe he wants to have a breath, take a drink, have his last meal. What does he say after doing the same thing 4 times? Benefiting himself, his soul, and his friends, and us, humanity. He says, well, surely you have more apprehensions and objections. Let's keep going. Let's go back again. You return to the start. You finish a dialectic on something, you go back to the start. That conversation about beings and the logos should help your understanding of beings and the logos, meaning you have more learning now, you've leveled up, meaning you can accept the same quest again, but do it in a more kick-ass way. The next dialectic is going to be the best one. The next dialectic is going to be the best one. That's a nice bumper sticker. The next dialectic is going to be the best one. So once you do your own, it might be a struggle at first. Do another one tomorrow. You're going to maybe have some dreams about it. The next day, do another one. You're perfecting your understanding and you're purifying your soul. Share it with your friends on the YouTube or on the Discord. You're helping each other. Make a myth out of it. You help humanity. Win, win, win. Like here. That's why we're reading it this way. So what does he say? Surely we can talk more. Don't hesitate to speak. You just done it 4 times. It's your last day. Come on, man. Don't you want a beer? Nope. Let's do it again. And by the way, I don't have to be the one leading. I mean, the logos of self is what is leading. I'm watching mind, or watching self unfold the logos through mind. There's our big 3, the big self triad. The self, first hypothesis. Mind, second hypothesis. I'm referring to the hypotheses of Parmenides, by the way. Different text. We're going to jump back into, after the Phaedo, we're going to get back into the second. We've done the introduction in the first. You'll find that series on YouTube. But just a little clue, you might find the one self in the first, and you might find the mind in the second. Maybe. Take it as a question, not a belief. So he's watching the logos from self. But hey, but if you have one, I'm listening to you. Why would Socrates want to listen to his dumb friends? He's Socrates. Doesn't matter. Whoever talks, they do it in the spirit. It doesn't matter. Because it's just truth. It's just understanding. You either agree or you don't. If you don't agree, you'll find out why. And then you'll correct it. You'll be brought together. And then you can take the next step. It doesn't matter who's leading, so long as you're following the logos. And that's philosophy. Following the logos. You mentioned it earlier. If there is a direct path of the logos, if there is a direct path, let's say, so all the way through, it's on account of this logos that we have this conclusion. If there's a direct path, let's look at the word path. Path. If there is a straight path with no deviations to guide us along the logos, that's the logos. We're following the logos, and this is philosophy. So you could say another way of defining philosophy is following the logos. So even Socrates, who's just shown that his friends are not as developed as him, saying, hey, what else do you have to say? And by the way, if you can see another way of going, take me along with you. That's what we're doing here. Following the logos, wherever it may come from, so long as we're doing it with the spirit of the adventurer.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
The human spirit, what it means to be actually rational, or what might be said to be joining the human race. This path of the logos, this following the logos, and racing there as quickly as we can. That's the human race. After saying it at least 4 times, he said, let's say it again. That's philosophy. Following the logos again and again and again, because why not? Let's say you do separate from the body. You're going to go to a different planet, see what aliens have for lunch. Oh, that's interesting. You have this for lunch. I never thought about what an alien would eat. Or are you going to follow the logos? Hey, you guys noticed that 1 and 1 is 2? What's 1? Hey, you guys interested in beauty? Oh, me too. Humans too. What is beauty itself? By the way, you have a kind of existence. Where do you think that came from? Hey, where do you think you'll go when you die? Wouldn't you be playing the same game wherever you find yourself? In any incarnation, in any planet, even if you can separate from this? Are you going to be a metaphysical tourist, or are you going to collect yourself together with the dialectic, self to self? And are you going to have friends? What are you going to talk about over coffee? How many Instagram likes because you're interested in fame? How much dollars you made because you're interested in riches? Or are you going to talk about this? Beings with logos, vision and understanding. Again and again. Even on your last day. So, Socrates is really helping us see what should we be doing with our time. What is philosophy? Following the logos from self, watching it, watching the greatest movie unfold that you are an active participant in. Well, I mean, you're watching, but it's still you. You're watching it happen in your life. You don't have to watch a superhero do it or watch Tom Cruise do it on a movie. You're doing it. You're having coffee. You're having the conversation. You're being a true hero. You're accepting the quest. The quest that you're here for because it's the meaning of life. It's our purpose.
You're a wizard, Harry.
What's our purpose? To watch and follow the logos. How often? Always. Say it once, do it again. Your friends, what are you going to talk about over coffee? Surely you'll find another way of talking about it. Let's keep going. What are you doing? Singing the greatest song. Walking and talking according to this way, not following others who don't care anything for the soul, but are in service of their body. Walk and talk this way. So, on that note, that's where we are in the text. Kind of bit of a summary, but worth it because we go back again and we see it with new eyes. We awaken a higher understanding. Escaping human ills, reaching that which we seek. Therefore, the meaning of life, because we all seek it. Whether or not you're doing it well. So another way of saying philosophy is, oh, it's just learning the games of the rules of the game and playing it well. It's being a human being. Just doing it properly, doing it rationally. It's being rational. Because hey, if you entered a video game, wouldn't you want to know what the purpose is and how to play? That's what philosophy is. What's the purpose? We just outlined it. How do we play? That's what we're figuring out. The logos, the dialectic, dianoia, the virtues. We're learning the rules, the goal of the game, and how to play. So what's philosophy? Becoming rational. Say it in a different way. Watching and following the logos. How often? At all times. Bringing everyone, benefiting. And what does it do? It bestows a benefit to your soul, your incarnation, and your friends. What are you going to talk about on your last day? This. How many times? As many times as you can. As many questions as you come across. As many objections or apprehensions that people have. really seeing more and more clearly what exactly philosophy is and how we can do it. So Simmias says, I'll be candid with you, Socrates. We didn't want to cause a disturbance by asking our other questions. And he goes, hang on a second. What about the swans? The swans have an awareness of where they're going. They have foreknowledge of the good in the next world, next place. That's why they sing. Because they belong to Apollo, the swans. The god of philosophy and music. They have knowledge of the good, and the swans are dedicated to the god of self, like I am. I'm a servant, like the swans, of the god of self, from which the logos unfolds. And therefore I have the art of prophecy from my master, not inferior to the swans. So the swans sing their most beautiful song right before they're about to die, because they have a prophecy of where they're going. So too do philosophers. That's what Socrates has been doing. He's been singing. There's our look for a good singer. This has been a kind of song. A swan song, as we call it. The greatest, most beautiful swan song that swans sing right before they die, because they know they're going to a better place. They don't fear it, of course. So hey, therefore for this sake, you have to. Thou must speak and ask whatever you want, whatever you wish. As long as the servant of the 11 Athenians who sentenced me to death allows it. So there's a little puzzle here. While being in the physical world, he is a servant to this person, and this person is a servant to unjust people. So no wonder he wants to go to a place where there are better masters than here. Because he can be told to shut up by the prison guard, who is a servant of these 11 Athenians who sentenced him to death for doing what's most good, and what all men actually want to do, whether they're aware of it or not. And they're either doing it depending on how much of a philosopher they are, and also how much of a mystic they are, and also how rational they are. How well they're in whether or not they're in the real human race that we're all in. So, it's pretty convincing. And we had a little reflection today, and we saw why he wants to say it again, and why it's important to keep going through it again, and why that's the only real game in town, and why it's the most fun, and why he's saying, hey, I've done it 4 times, let's do it a 5th. Like a swan song, singing to self. What did he say about finding a singer? Sing to self every day until you sing away your problems. Sing to self. And the songs are from the self, which is a beautiful thing. So he said that, sing to self every day until you sing away your false beliefs about truth, reality, soul, death, afterlife. Being, in one word, being. So, sounds convincing to me. Next time we're going to see whether it was convincing to Simmias. Is he going to say, oh no, but surely you want to do something else? Or has he been convinced and he's going to sing another song? And actually, let's use what we've seen to predict. Let's practice the art of prophecy. From what? Apollo. Because we are a servant to the master Apollo. We're a servant to philosophy. That's what it means to live well. And to practice the art of dying too. So let's practice our art of prophecy using philosophy. Well, 4 times he has addressed a question of his friends. And in doing so, he talked about being, his highest vision of being, using the logos. So being, highest version of vision, being, his highest logos or understanding of being, dianoia. And he's done it in a dialectic format in order to answer the specific question and benefit his friends while also benefiting everybody, including himself, because he's been talking about being with the Logos through dialectic. So let's prophesize. Next time, Simius maybe will ask a question about what he's concerned about. Maybe he has a fear that's tricked. So Socrates is laying down the understanding, but hey, it's a back and forth. We have our ignorance we have to purify ourselves from. So the truth will trigger the counterattack. Socrates triggered the 11 Athenians murdering him. That's the back and forth. Pleasure and pain, hot and cold, living and dying, truth and the counterattack, the back and forth. Don't get stuck on the shadow, of course. Don't think the shadow of the truth is the truth. That's injustice and bias. So we can prophesize that there will be a counterattack or a problem that will be stimulated. Simius will have. He'll have an objection. It probably won't be the same as Cebes about the soul scattering to the wind, but he might have another idea of the soul and death that causes his own fear, that he will ask to be sung to sing to self, to sing away the fear of what's false, the fear of the boogeyman that he got from his childhood, probably his inner child, as Cebes said. So he'll have that kind of an objection. Socrates will answer it using the dialectic. But in answering it, he'll also be talking about being with the Logos. That's what he's been doing all the way through. Which is being in Logos, or Logos directed towards being, makes the virtues virtues. Collects yourself, and that, if he can do it at all times, that might be a good question or a possible answer to how can we do this at all times. If the virtues are distinguished from the vices in that it's Logos directed towards being, and not desiring physical things or pleasures or pains or fame or riches, then how can we do it at all times and not self-imprison ourselves? Maybe he's helping us to show it, because if you're really addressing questions and concerns, it's just another way of talking about being with the Logos. That's our prophecy. Simius will have a problem, a false belief that rubs up, does not harmonize with this doctrine. He will ask to be sung to. Socrates will sing to self and maybe sing away. Maybe, I'm not sure whether it'll be successful or not, but he will sing a song to sing away that false belief about soul and death. And in doing so, he'll be using the structure of the dialectic, and he'll be talking about being with the Logos. That's all he's been doing. And all we should do. That's where we're going. There's our prophecy. There's our teaser. There's our teaser for next podcast. Create your own prophecy. And I hope you've got some puzzles out of this. I hope you found this recap enjoyable. I hope this discovery about philosophy watching and following the Logos, found it interesting. And I hope to see you next time. Take care. Oh, and like and subscribe and join Discord if you like to. Keep the conversation rolling. What else should we do before the sun sets?